The maybe most profound question of all time, God, does he exist? In this video, we will go through several arguments for the existence of God, starting with the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument goes like this. 1. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2. The universe had a beginning. 3. Therefore, the universe had a cause. But how do we know that those assertions are true? Well, that everything that begins to exist has a cause is the most fundamental law of science. If you see a ball in the woods, you know it had a cause, right? If the ball were of the same size as the sun, it would still require a cause. And if it were as big as our entire universe, yes, it would still need a cause. If something can come from nothing, we would need no scientists, because everything they do is searching for causes. Why can universes come from nothing, but not tennis balls? It seems to me that the law of causality is totally true.
Now we know that causality is indeed true, but we must also examine the evidence for the beginning of the universe, aka the Big Bang. Here are 4 lines of evidence. 1. The second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics states that energy in the form of heat always flows from warmer to cooler areas, and that usable energy in a process always decreases. In every energy transformation, entropy increases, which is a measure of disorder or unusable energy. This means that over time energy becomes less usable for doing work. This is why machines cannot be 100% efficient and why we cannot create a perpetual motion machine, a machine that would be able to run forever without new energy. So if the usable energy is becoming less and less, it shows us that the universe had an absolute beginning. 2. The universe is expanding. Redshift is evidence for the expansion of the universe. Redshift is when light from an object moving away from us shifts towards the red end of the spectrum. In the universe, light from distant galaxies is redshifted, indicating they're moving away. The more distant the galaxy, the greater the redshift, suggesting faster movement. This is key evidence for the universe's expansion. 3. The cosmic microwave background. The cosmic microwave background, CMB, is the residual heat from the Big Bang. It's detectable as faint microwave radiation coming uniformly from every direction in the universe. This radiation was released about 380,000 years after the Big Bang, when the universe had cooled enough for light to travel freely. As the universe expanded, this light stretched into longer wavelengths, shifting from visible light to microwaves. The temperature of this radiation is incredibly uniform, around 2.73 degrees above absolute zero. Tiny fluctuations in this uniformity provide important clues about the early universe and its composition, age, and geometry. Thus, the CMB is a key piece of evidence for the Big Bang theory and the ongoing expansion of the universe. 4. Einstein's theory of general relativity. Einstein's theory of general relativity is a fundamental theory in physics that describes gravity as a geometric property of space and time, or space-time. It proposes that massive objects cause a distortion in space-time, which is perceived as gravity. As for the Big Bang, general relativity allows for solutions where the universe is expanding from a highly compressed state. Observations of our universe, such as the redshift of distant galaxies and the cosmic microwave background, align with these solutions, providing strong evidence for the Big Bang theory. Thus, general relativity forms the foundation of our understanding of the Big Bang and the expansion of the universe.
But there's also scientific evidence from geology that the universe had a beginning. As many of us learned in high school chemistry, radioactive elements decay over time into other elements. For example, radioactive uranium eventually turns into lead. This means that if all uranium atoms were infinitely old, they would all be lead by now, but they're not. So the Earth cannot be infinitely old. Finally, there's a philosophical line of evidence for the beginning of the universe. This line of evidence is so rationally inescapable that some consider it the strongest argument of all. It's called the kalam, from the Arabic word for eternal, cosmological argument, and it goes like this. 1. An infinite number of days has no end. 2. But today is the end day of history, history being a collection of all days. 3. Therefore, there were not an infinite number of days before today, i.e., time had a beginning. To grasp this argument, see the timeline marked in segments of days. The further left you go, the further back in history you go. Now assume for a moment that this line extends to the left indefinitely, so that you can't see if or where it begins. But as you look to the right, you can see the end of the line because the last segment of the line represents today. Tomorrow isn't here yet, but when it gets here, we'll add one more segment, i.e., a day, to the right end of the line. Some may say that infinite numbers can exist, so why can't infinite days? Because there's a difference between an abstract infinite series and a concrete one. The one is purely theoretical, the other is actual. Mathematically, we can conceive of an infinite number of days, but actually we could never count or live an infinite number of days. You can conceive of an infinite number of mathematical points between two bookends on a shelf, but you could not fit an infinite number of books between them. That's the difference between an abstract and a concrete. Numbers are abstract, days are concrete. What we are saying here is that the universe, Big Bang or not, had a beginning. That is, the cosmological argument is true because both premises of the argument are true. Everything that comes to be has a cause, and the universe came to be. Since the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner.
But what is this cause like? Could it be something else than God? So the universe is space, time, and matter, so the cause of this universe cannot be of that, because those things didn't exist before the Big Bang. It must also be extremely powerful to create such an enormous universe. And I would also argue personal. Why? Because only persons can make choices, and going from a state of nothing to a state of something requires a choice. So this cause is 1. Spaceless, 2. Timeless and eternal, 3. Immaterial, simple because he has no parts, 4. Extremely powerful, and 5. Personal. This is the perfect description of a theistic God.
So we know that the cosmological argument is really true. The cosmological argument goes like this, just a quick reminder. 1. Everything that comes to be has a cause. 2. The universe came to be. 3. Therefore, the universe had a cause. So we saw evidence for the first two premises, then it logically follows that the universe indeed had a cause.
That was the cosmological argument. Now let's look at the teleological argument. It goes something like this. 1. Every design has a designer. 2. The universe is extremely fine-tuned and most probably contains design. 3. Therefore, the universe was designed. Let's look at some fine-tuned things in the universe. 1. Oxygen level. Imagine a world where oxygen levels were significantly higher or lower. If oxygen were too abundant, wildfires might rage uncontrollably, and the atmosphere could become toxic. Conversely, if oxygen were scarce, complex life forms would struggle to survive. Our current oxygen level of approximately 21% strikes a delicate balance. It allows us to breathe comfortably while supporting the metabolic needs of plants and animals. 2. Atmospheric transparency. Picture Earth's atmosphere as a cosmic filter. It selectively allows certain wavelengths of light to pass through while absorbing or scattering others. The visible spectrum, which includes the colors we see, is a sweet spot where our atmosphere is remarkably transparent. Sunlight reaches the surface, nourishing plants through photosynthesis. Beyond visible light, radio waves also penetrate the atmosphere, allowing us to communicate wirelessly across vast distances. 3. Moon-Earth gravitational interactions. The dance between the Moon and Earth is captivating. Their gravitational tango shapes our world. The Moon's gravitational pull creates ocean tides, influencing coastal ecosystems and navigation. Remarkably, the Moon's iron-rich maria and aluminum-rich highlands contribute to its gravitational field. 4. Carbon dioxide level. Carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas, plays a crucial role in regulating Earth's temperature. Our current CO2 concentration of approximately 421 ppm is higher than pre-industrial levels due to human activities, burning fossil fuels, deforestation, etc. While too much CO2 can lead to global warming, too little would hinder photosynthesis and plant growth. Balance is key. 5. Gravity. Gravity, the cosmic glue, binds us to Earth and shapes the cosmos. The gravitational constant G determines the strength of this force. It's a tiny number, yet it governs the motion of planets, stars, and galaxies. Without gravity, we'd float aimlessly, and celestial bodies wouldn't coalesce into the awe-inspiring structures we observe. If it were just a little bit different, we would not exist. This makes a strong case for God. Now let's look at the moral argument. The moral argument for the existence of God refers to the claim that God is needed to provide a coherent ontological foundation for the existence of objective moral values and duties. The argument can be summarized in the following syllogism. Premise 1. If God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise 2. Objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion. Therefore, God exists. Since this is a logically valid syllogism, the atheist, in order to maintain his non-belief in God, must reject at least one of the two premises. By objective morality, we mean a system of ethics which universally pertains irrespective of the opinions or tastes of human persons. For example, the Holocaust was morally wrong irrespective of what Hitler and the Nazis believed about it. And it would have remained morally wrong even if the Nazis had won World War II and compelled everyone into compliance with their values. This view, known in philosophy as moral realism, contrasts with moral relativism, which maintains that no one is objectively correct or incorrect with respect to their moral values and judgments. Most people want to uphold premise 2 of the moral argument. After all, if there are no objective ethics, then who is to say that Hitler was objectively morally wrong? Humans have an intuitive sense of right and wrong. The moral argument requires only that at least some actions are objectively right or wrong, e.g., torturing children for pleasure is objectively morally wrong. Premise 1 relates to the perfect standard against which everything else is measured. God, being the only morally perfect being, is the standard against which all other things are judged. Moreover, in the absence of theism, nobody has been able to conceive of a defensible grounding for moral values. Moral argument, an important distinction. It is important to bear in mind that the moral argument pertains to the ultimate source of objective moral values and duties, moral ontology, and not how we know what is moral or immoral, moral epistemology, and not what we mean by good, bad, or right, wrong, moral semantics. The theistic ethicist maintains that moral values are grounded in the character and nature of God. Those who are divine command theorists maintain that moral duties are based on what God commands. Philosopher William Lane Craig puts it this way: duty arises in response to an imperative from a competent authority. For example, if some random person were to tell me to pull my car over, I would have absolutely no legal obligation to do so. But if a policeman were to issue such a command, I'd have a legal obligation to obey. The difference in the two cases lies in the persons who issued the commands. One is qualified to do so, while the other is not. Moral argument, Euthyphro's dilemma. Plato, in his dialogue Euthyphro, presents a fictional dialogue between his philosophical mentor Socrates and a character by the name of Euthyphro. Euthyphro explains to Socrates that he has come to lay manslaughter charges against his father because of his involvement in the death of a worker. This worker himself had killed a slave who had belonged to the family estate. This worker was found dead, gagged, and bound in a ditch. This gives rise to a lengthy dialogue between Euthyphro and Socrates, which eventually leads to the famous Euthyphro's dilemma. Socrates says, "But I will amend the definition so far as to say that what all the gods hate is impious, and what they love pious or holy, and what some of them love and others hate is both or neither. Shall this be our definition of piety and impiety?" Euthyphro goes on to say, "Yes, I should say that what all the gods love is pious and holy, and the opposite, which they all hate, impious." Socrates subsequently inquires of him, "The point which I should first wish to understand is whether the pious or holy is beloved by the gods because it is holy, or holy because it is beloved of the gods." The question is posed this way: is X the right thing to do because God commands it, or does God command it because it is already the right thing to do? I take the former option. Normally, the problem with accepting the horn is that there is a presumption that the commands in question from God are arbitrary, i.e., God could have commanded that we ought to lie. But that's just false. The theist wants to say that God is essentially loving, honest, etc., and therefore, in all worlds at which God exists, his commands are going to be consistent with his nature. And therefore, in all worlds, he will disapprove of lying. Moral argument: the shortcomings of utilitarianism. There are various non-theistic systems of ethics, none of which succeed in providing a robust ontological foundation or objective moral values and duties. One of these systems, popularized recently by Sam Harris in his book The Moral Landscape, is called utilitarianism, and in its most common formulation, refers to the view that ethics are determined by what constitutes the greatest happiness for the greatest number. One difficulty lies in the fact that it attempts to balance two different scales employed to assess the moral virtue of an action, i.e., the amount of utility produced and the number of people affected. This can often lead to conflicting answers. In some cases, an activity might be considered better for a greater number of individuals, whereas a different activity might create a greater overall utility. Utilitarians try to maximize with their actions the utility of the long-term consequences of those actions. However, short of possession of omniscience, it is impossible to evaluate the respective long-term results of different activities. Utilitarianism also does not take into account the individual's intent. Activity X could be done sincerely by an individual who believes that what he is doing will create the maximum utility. But if activity X turns out in the long term not to produce the desired utility, then his action, under the philosophy of utilitarianism, would be considered less moral than an activity that created more utility. Conclusion. In conclusion, the moral argument is a robust argument for the existence of God. Humans, being shaped in the image of God, have an intuitive sense of right and wrong. It is not at all clear how the atheist, except at the expense of moral realism, can maintain an objective standard of ethics without such a being as God as his ontological foundation. We've just explored three profound and compelling arguments for the existence of God. First, the cosmological argument, rooted in logic and simplicity, demonstrates that the universe had a beginning, and therefore must have had a cause. This cause, by necessity, transcends the universe itself. Next, the teleological argument reveals the remarkable complexity and fine-tuning of our universe, suggesting that such intricate order is highly improbable to have occurred by mere chance. This points to an intelligent designer. Finally, the moral argument provides a solid foundation for objective morality, implying the existence of a moral lawgiver who grounds our sense of right and wrong. Taken together, these arguments form a compelling case, leading any thoughtful individual to conclude that the evidence for God's existence is not just persuasive, but overwhelming.